night that there'd be an extra £2 billion for mental health services made by the Chancellor on universal credit. Philip Hammond had tried to ensure, because there was a rebellion in the offing, that from Conservative MPs, that the worst affected would have their predicaments improved. So there's an extra £1 billion to help with the transition across from the benefits people are currently receiving to universal credit, and then the work taper has been reduced as well, along with an extra £1.7 billion on the limit at which to help people with the limit you see your universal credits tail off. That was part of a big announcement. And then the borrowing figures were much better than forecast. And so the Chancellor was able to avoid reneging on David Cameron's pledges back in 2015 to not increase. Well, Philip Hammond wouldn't have increased the personal allowance to £12,500 and the 40p threshold up to 50 grand.
The Prime Minister pledged austerity is over. This, Mr Deputy Speaker, is a broken promise budget. What we've heard today are half measures and quick fixes while austerity grinds on. And far from people's hard work and sacrifices having paid off, as the Chancellor claims, this government has frittered it away in ideological tax cuts to the richest in our society. Mr Deputy Speaker, they said austerity would mean the deficit would close by 2015. Today, the Chancellor has confirmed it will still be there 9 years later in 2024.
Jeremy Corbyn alluding there to the fact that actually the structural deficit in 2024 is going to be around £19 billion. George Osborne, of course, had promised when he was Chancellor to eliminate the deficit and be running a surplus by 2020. That isn't obviously going to happen now.
No, it's a funny concept, though, Theo, isn't it? Austerity.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it sounds like, you know, the government's being incredibly mean at every level. And whilst there have been cuts in public services, you know, I noticed that since the Tories came to power in 2010, the national debt then was £650 billion, and it's now £1.8 trillion.
It's touching. I think the latest figures. It's touching two trillion pounds.
So it's a little bit difficult to talk about austerity when we're still borrowing vast sums of money.
There were two back in 2010, 2011. There were two ideas put forward. Of course, the one that won out was the one put forward by the Chancellor at the time, George Osborne, that in order to deal with the structural deficit, which at the time stood at £160 billion a year, you needed to cut the spending. And then the other idea was Ed Balls's, the Shadow Chancellor's, which was relying on Keynesian economics, is that by investing in public infrastructure projects, you keep the economy ticking over, you have fewer people on benefits, you have greater tax receipts, and therefore you're able to pay off the nation's credit card much quicker. Now, George Osborne went down the austerity route, and it was, Labour ended up apologising under Ed Miliband for the management of the economy under Gordon Brown. But nevertheless, to have thought back then that we'd now end up in a situation where the Tories are trying to ape Jeremy Corbyn in ending austerity when
I know.
8 years ago, it would have been sacrilege to suggest anything other than going down the George Osborne route.
You couldn't really invent it. No. You couldn't really invent it. And on Brexit, one little point here. You know, I noticed that NHS funding is to rise by £20.5 billion in real terms over the next 5 years. You know, it's a big increase. That, of course, is slightly more than the famous £350 million a week, isn't it?
It is slightly more than £350 million a week. But the Chancellor is trying to turn this on its head, and he's saying to, and this was a point picked up by Jacob Rees-Mogg over the weekend and this morning with Nick Ferrari on LBC, is that if you don't go along with the idea that Theresa May has a deal, all of this extra money for schools, all of this extra money for the NHS, for mental health provision, for planting more trees, for it's all going to go out the window. I'm going to have to come back to the House of Commons for a new budget in the spring, which would have just been a very nice, easy spring statement. I'm going to come back with a new, really difficult, hard budget that you're going to have to swallow if we go down the route of a no-deal Brexit. And that's angered many Brexiteers within the Conservative Party who are saying, well, this is just... I don't know what Project Fear Mark we're on right now, Nigel.
No,
Project Fear Mark 3 from their point of view. The Chancellor and the Treasury, the bastion of Remainers, as Mr. Rees-Mogg, or Ramonas, as Mr. Rees-Mogg referred to it this morning, simply trying to put the frighteners on the British public that they have to accept Theresa May's deal, because if they don't accept Theresa May's deal, then they're going to have more austerity.
And we'll see more of that argument in the next few weeks, I'm sure. Theo Usherwood, thank you very much indeed. Well, there we are. Hammond has spoken. The Chancellor, he tells us the era of austerity is finally coming to an end. He announces increases for the National Health Service, cuts on business rates. He says he can do this because the deficit has fallen more sharply than they'd hoped for. So tell me, do you trust the Conservatives when they say austerity is coming to an end? And if you think, no, not a chance, they don't mean it, they're not being truthful, call 0345 6060 973. Or maybe you think, actually, it's taken a long time, but they're getting there at last. Text to 84850. And when you hear Jeremy Corbyn saying that it's a budget of broken promises, do you trust any of them? Let me know what you think by tweeting, using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. I'm going to go to Rudy in Exeter, our first caller on this subject. Good evening, Rudy.
Hi, Nigel.
So
I don't know if you. We'll put it this way, Nigel. I will not be bought by this fake budget to think that they can buy me off in order to accept whatever deal that Theresa May gives. You know, and have you noticed it's a bit of a deja vu of an Osborne of if you don't accept this deal, then tomorrow is exactly the same deja vu of fear-mongering tactics. And I will
Rudy, let's just remind everybody what you're talking about, because this was during the referendum, with about a week to go, when it looked like, gosh, you know, Remain were not as far ahead in the polls as they feared. And George Osborne said if we voted Brexit, there'd be an emergency budget, didn't he? With big tax increases, interest rates going up. So you see this. So you do think this is Project Fear Mark 2?
Oh, definitely. That's exactly why he's doing it. It's like saying, if you don't accept the deal that May... Because he's a Remainer. You know, and like Osborne was a Remainer. He's doing this to try and scare people in order to vote the Tories in again if there's an election. And if you don't accept the deal, then there's going to be all this austerity. Well, we'll all be better off because we won't have to pay nearly $60 billion on the deal.
So you are totally unimpressed, Rudy?
Yeah, it makes no difference to me. I still feel the same, and I will not be bought by these cheap budget tactics.
Thank you. Rudy will not be bought. Nigel, is austerity ended or coming to an end? It can't be both. Which one is it? Mrs May said one thing. The Chancellor said something else. I don't trust them, says T. Corbyn, if he was in charge, back to strikes on the good old days, says Dave. Why have the bankers got away with the mess they caused while we're here to pick up the bill? Adrian, that's a point I think we've all been debating over the course of the last 10 years. The bankers were allowed to get away with it because Gordon Brown changed all the rules and let them get away with it. But of course, you're right. It's the taxpayer that bailed them out. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show exclusively on LBC, and it's now 6:15. So Philip Hammond in the budget says the era of austerity is coming to an end. Public finances are a lot better than predicted. Tax revenues are up. Therefore, there is a bit more money to spend, particularly on the health service, but equally some cuts in business rates and a budget that some will say, well, this actually looks pretty good. But, he warns, if you don't accept the Prime Minister's deal, if we were to leave without a deal, then all of this would have to be scrapped and we would need to have another budget in the spring, an emergency budget, a bit like the one that Osborne promised before the election. But on that basic statement, that austerity is now coming to an end, that the good days are on their way. Do you trust them? Do you believe them? 0345 6060 973. Katie is calling from Lewis in Sussex, a new caller to the show. Good evening, Katie.
Hello, Nigel.
So do you believe them when they say that austerity is coming to an end?
No, because I think they have to take something off the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% of the population that exist in this country for that to happen.
Right. I mean, this is an interesting one, isn't it? There's a message here, Katie, that I got from Chris in Dorset. He says, on the surface, a good budget, but for the poor, austerity will never end, and for the rich, it never began. And one of the problems, Katie, is that what we did in the wake of the 2008 crisis, through all the measures that Osborne put in place, particularly quantitative easing, we basically pumped up the price of property in the stock markets, and the rich did get richer. That is absolutely, and I get that, I understand that, and it does seem to be a pretty unfair outcome from that financial crash. But Katie, isn't...
Today, I was hoping to be poorer today, and I'm not. And to me, this is really wrong.
So at what level, Katie, do you think that the well-off should be taxed more heavily?
Well, the people who are earning lots of money, they can afford a few more pence on top of their income tax. A lot of us that are saving lots of money for our pensions, we can afford not to have so much money that is tax-free. I mean, it's just, I've come from being poor and not having any money to, having money, and a lot of it is basically, obviously, luck and a bit of hard work and being prudent. And I realise that, I am lucky to be in the situation I'm in. I could have been in a totally opposite situation. And it doesn't make me feel happy hearing this budget this afternoon. And for them to be so smug, this is what really upsets me, and I'm not surprised that so many people
how are they smug, Casey?
Turned off politics.
Tell me about this smugness that you detected.
Well, I mean, I don't want to hear any sort of getting at the opposition. I want a party that's cut in to say what they're going to do, how it's going to change society, how it's going to benefit.
But on these taxes,
people,
on these taxes,
95% of the population that need some improvement in this society.
But Katie, let me give you two counter-arguments, all right, to what you're saying. First is that the top 1% of earners are already paying 28% of the country's income, so that you could argue that they are doing a lot. Secondly, isn't there a big danger, Katie, that you start putting income tax rates up to 55%, 65%, people simply leave the country and you lose talent?
No, I don't think it has to be anything that great. I think it just needs to be for people who are luckier, with their earnings in this country.
All right. Well, if
1 or 2 or 3 or 4%.
So if top rate tax
than they are at the moment.
If top rate tax is now 45% on income, what should it be?
Mm.
What should it be? Are you saying 50% or what do you think?
46%.
All right. Okay.
Make sure
No.
that the people who are doing okay in this country are having to contribute more to all the many, many millions who aren't.
Okay. No, Katie, thank you for your point. A lot of people who are high earners would say, hey, we are the top 1% paying 28% already, but I get the argument. Andrew in Warwick, what do you make of that budget today?
I think we're being set up. I think this is a little bit of a longer game plan. I mean, I think what's happening is we're being given all these nice, fluffy, pleasant things like sort of 20 billion for mental health and all the rest. And the idea is that what will happen is we'll then get to a point where they'll go, oh, well, you know what? We've got another referendum. You see, if you vote out, you can't have all that. Well, you'll have to give those things back. It's kind of the first time it was like, ooh, look what we'll have to do to you. The next time is here, cuddle it, sniff it, get used to it, and then have it taken away from you if you don't like it. I mean, they do that to 7-year-olds. You give them
cynical Brexit games, Andrew. That's what you're saying.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I think so. I think this is all to so that in a few months' time they can shriek, oh, won't someone think of the children?
Yeah. No, okay, Andrew, get the point. Well, I have to say, it does. I think Andrew's got a point. I think there is something intensely political about this budget and about the deal that I'm convinced Mrs May will sign up to in December, on the night of the 13th of December in Brussels. I do believe that. Can't wait to get the new 50p coin, lol. Yeah, you see, there's going to be a new 50p coin, and on the back it's going to talk about cooperation with all nations. They're calling it the Remainers 50p. Who do we trust? Our economy is ticking along, albeit slowly. Corbyn's party will completely wreck it, says Graham. Well, Jeremy Corbyn would argue, actually very much in line with Katie, my previous caller but one, that the rich can afford more. That's what he will argue at the next election. Since austerity began, how many billions have been spent on foreign aid, says Richard from Chelsea. Oh, Richard, well, 2010, let's say, when Cameron got into power, 2018, 80, 100 billion. Okay, that's a complete stab in the dark. I reckon I'm right within 5 or 10% either way. But about 100 billion sterling we will have given in foreign aid since Cameron first took office in 2010. Nigel, why do chancellors always threaten us with these amateur dramatics? Emergency budget starting to get boring, says Robert. Well, that's one of the dangers, of course. They, cry wolf, I suppose. Let's go to Edgware and talk to Joe. Joe, come on, you must have been impressed by the budget. Somebody must have been.
Not so much impressed as more relieved.
Okay.
Listen, I'm not. I haven't voted for Conservatives. I don't think I would, based on the direction the party's headed in or where it's been in the past. But we've had the biggest decrease in public spending and the smallest state since just before World War II. So any sort of relief is welcome. I sort of agree with the lady who spoke before, because ultimately, without sort of a comprehensive overhaul of the taxation system, it's not going to be where I want it to be. But I wanted to pick up on something you said earlier about George Osborne and promising the punishment budget, which obviously never happened. It does seem a little bit boy cried wolf to me. But the wolf did the boy did get eaten in the end. And just because George Osborne was, shall we say, relaxed with the truth, doesn't mean that Philip Hammond is lying.
Joe, 2 years after what the Chancellor told us would be an economic cataclysm, the public finances are very much better than any of us expected. That kind of says to me that Brexit may not be the disaster it's often painted out to be.
But nothing's actually happened yet, Nigel. You know this. You know.
But we were told it would happen immediately.
Yeah, so we were lied to. Everyone knows everyone lied in the referendum. You did. George Osborne did. Everyone lied in the referendum.
No, Joe, name me one lie. Name me one lie I gave in the referendum, please.
That poster you stood in front of, what did that have to do with the EU?
Absolutely everything, and I'll be talking, actually, in a couple of minutes, I'll be talking about Chancellor Merkel and why she's had to stand down today as the leader of her political party, all related directly to that poster. And whether you liked it, Joe, or not, it certainly wasn't untrue. Anyway, Joe, I'm not going to impress you on that one, but Joe feels relieved, and actually, shopkeepers out there will feel relieved. People who believe in the National Health Service today will feel a bit relieved. Beer drinkers will feel relieved. There is no increase in the beer duty. So, on the face of it, it's not a bad budget. As I say, for at last, many years after predicted, but at last, public finances are a lot better than we thought they were going to be. It's just the sheer politicisation around Brexit that I find really difficult. And around that, I certainly don't trust them. Tell me, do you trust the Conservatives when they tell us the era of austerity is coming to an end? You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's now 6:30. The era of austerity is coming to an end, and we see increases in spending for the National Health Service and elsewhere, as the public finances are very much better this year and projected to be for next year. So do you trust and believe the Chancellor when he says this era of austerity is coming to an end, or are you worried that it's a very political budget saying, hey, it's all great, but you've got to accept the Prime Minister's deal, because if there's no deal, all bets are off, there'll be an emergency budget? Before we get back to that, Elections yesterday, regional ones in the state of Hesse, and once again, disastrous results for Angela Merkel's Conservative CDU party. Equally, very bad results for the SPD, Social Democrats, who had their worst results since 1946 in that particular region, with big gains for the Greens and big gains for the Eurosceptic, immigrant-critical AfD. German politics is fundamentally shifting and changing. The centre is struggling to hold. As a result of it, Angela Merkel has announced today that she will be standing down as the leader of the party. It'll be an orderly transition. There'll be a contest, I guess, over the course of the next few months, but she wants to stay in as Chancellor until the end of 2021, at the end of this term. Whether she can survive that long, I don't know. And it's very interesting to reflect. I mean, this has been an absolutely extraordinary political career. She has been so solidly in charge of Germany now for 13 years. In many ways, she looked unassailable, particularly through the big banking crisis of 2008, when Germany suddenly became the unquestionably dominant power in the European Union. Before 2008, nobody ever suggested to me that it was a German-dominated EU. Since then, nobody ever suggested that it wasn't. But it all goes to show, however great a career you have, however good you are as a political leader, you can make one fundamental mistake that can change absolutely everything. And with her, it took place on the 31st of August 2015 as she visited a refugee camp near Dresden. Remember, the great migrant crisis across the Mediterranean began in the April of 2015. She'd been heckled by some protesters, and this is what she had to say in response.
An diese Dinge herangehen muss sein, wir haben so vieles geschafft, wir schaffen das.
Translated, it means we have managed so many things, we will also manage this situation. Put more simply, we can manage this. We can do it. We can do this. By which she meant we can take as many as need to be taken. And it led to about 1.4 million people settling in Germany very, very rapidly. Nearly all young males, and, the previous caller before the break talked about my poster showing those people rushing to get into Europe because of what Merkel had said. Very, very few from Syria, hardly any that would have qualified actually as refugees. It has led to tremendous upset in Germany, change in German cities, and that is the mistake that has signalled the beginning of the end of her career, and I think a fundamental change in German politics, probably for a very, very long time to come. So I guess it applies to all of us, and whatever we do in life, one big mistake and you can ruin many years of hard work. And just a comment here on Chris Tarrant, who of course used to work for many, many years for Capital Radio. And Chris Tarrant, in an interview in The Guardian, said today, "I voted to remain, and 2 years on, I'm now a staunch Brexiteer. Why? I'm so utterly sickened by the European elite creaming it off on a Blatter scale," referring to Seb Blatter from football. "I think the sooner we get out, the better. We will survive and carry on very nicely because we're British. I've been appalled by the way they've treated us. All this stuff about we're going to teach you a lesson." So an interesting comment there. Not many figures who work in media, not many come out and say that they did vote Brexit or they would now vote Brexit. Many have been very concerned and scared to say that for fear of what their colleagues may think. Tarrant's saying it very clearly, and I felt this all the way along, that just the way that Tusk, the way that Barnier, the way that Juncker have behaved has upset a lot of people. Back to the budget. Right, well, here's one saying, on the topic of the rich, please bear in mind, most rich don't use doctors, don't use our hospitals, cost the country less but pay more. The rich pay enough in tax. And it's always tempting to say, tax the top 5% a little bit more. But I'm old enough to remember the 1970s. I'm old enough to remember very high levels of tax. I'm old enough to remember the brain drain from this country of bright, talented young men and women who simply left our shores because top tax rates at 83% said to people it simply isn't worth staying here. So I am nervous about putting up taxes for high earners. I really am. Let's go to Michael in Bromley. Michael, good evening.
Hi, Nigel. Good evening.
So is austerity over? Happy Days Are Here Again was the song that Franklin Delano Roosevelt played in the mid-30s to say the Great Depression was over. Are we in that sort of situation? Are we in that situation?
Well, indirectly, comparative to when you look at the Tories, yes. But austerity isn't ending, Nigel. Austerity is starting. And all you've got to do is just look at the numbers, and that shows and gives proof that austerity is about to start. The reason being why austerity is going to start, Nigel, because we have a £13 trillion private debt bill. Today, did Philip Hammond mention about the £1 trillion pension debt? Did he mention about the £5.8 trillion debt on UK banks, which the UK taxpayer owes 800 billion of that if the banks go under? 1.4 trillion in mortgages.
Yeah. But if the banks go under, Michael, I mean, you could argue, I mean, so much of our economic system is based on trust, isn't it? It's based on believing that the whole thing's going to stay afloat, and provided you believe that, it generally does. Yeah,
it's all based on trust. The stock market's based on trust. Now, when that budget come out today, Nigel, I trade the market. I have for quite a few years now. The stock market did not move a bit. It moved more when HSBC Bank announced its earnings today. So the stock market isn't buying it. The traders and the banks know that it's just a political talk just to get nurses, doctors, drivers, thinkers for the vote. We know fully well, and what they're doing, the Tories are smart, Nigel. I said this to you a year ago. They're going to set up this crash in parallel with Brexit, and today's budget gives a surety because they've took their liability away from what's coming. They know fully well that when rates rise on this 13 trillion debt, public debt is not a problem. It's a private debt that's going to cause the chaos. It is. So when rates rise on that,
Michael, I understand what you're saying, but that's only if confidence collapses completely. Michael, how did the pound react to this? You talking about the stock market.
The pound done quite well. But the pound moved more around Merkel saying that she's going to basically step down. But the pound didn't really move because the stock market isn't believing what is coming out of politics at the moment. The stock market knows when rates rise on this debt, that's when the trouble's going to come. And look in the past 2 weeks, Nigel, that shows it. The market's been crashing solely because the Federal Reserve increased
putting up rates.
Now imagine rates next year.
Yeah, no. If we have rapidly rising interest rates, we will have problems. I'm sure of that. Michael, thank you. Paul is a new caller from Mill Hill. Good evening, Paul. Good evening, Paul. No, I've lost him. I'm going to go to Manchester and speak to Mark. Mark, good evening. Were you impressed today by Philip Hammond? Do you believe him when he says austerity is coming to an end?
Good evening, Nigel. I was impressed.
Okay.
It wasn't the budget I expected. It was like a pre-election budget.
It was, wasn't it? Yeah. It was. But Mark, actually, in a way, it was, because it is a pre-EU deal budget. That's what it's all about. That's the key to understanding today, isn't it?
So there's a note of cynicism. And I'm still happy what I've heard today. The note of cynicism that apparently I heard this morning that Philip Hammond said, I'm going to deliver this budget. However, I'll rip up and start again if we don't get a deal. So there's echoes there of George Osborne's punishment.
Absolutely. No, Mark, you got a rotten line. I'm sorry. Do call again. And I thought there were some good things in it. I think more attention to mental health services is something that I think everyone recognises is long overdue. I was particularly pleased that there is going to be some help, albeit temporary, but there is going to be some help on business rates. I think, very, very difficult for people in the high street competing with so many things being bought and sold online. He is going to have a go at some form of tax on the tech giants, but was really saying that would only produce at max a few $100 million every year rather than the billions that many of us were hoping and expecting for. But I do think there were some quite good things. Leslie in Cheshire says to me, what's wrong with being rich? I'm not, but if people have worked hard and created jobs, who would want a poor boss anyway? Well, I think people want their boss to be successful, but do they want their boss to own great big yachts in the Mediterranean? I'm not sure they do. I just don't think, folks, that a return to the 1970s, big taxes on the rich would do this country any good at all. That is my view. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on RBC, and it's now 6:45. Things are getting better. Public finances are better than anybody could have anticipated. There's more money for the National Health Service, a special new emphasis on mental health, help for the high street with cuts in business rates and many things that on the face of it, people would say, well, actually, do you know what? That sounds pretty good, really, to us. But it's not a pre-election budget. It's a pre-December EU summit budget, because if Mrs May's deal that she comes back with isn't agreed, well then, in the circumstances of a no-deal budget, all of this will be lost and there'll be another emergency budget in March. That, to me, is the big political background behind this budget. But do you believe when they say austerity is coming to an end that it is? Second time lucky, Paul in Mill Hill, a new caller. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
I've got you. Right, Paul. So what did you make of the budget today?
I think it was a much to nothing budget. There was nothing really that exciting. I'm delighted that some potholes are going to be repaired. I'm a high tax earner. There's nothing really there that's going to affect me day to day. I think it was just a bit boring, really.
So, Paul, should you be paying more tax? Come on.
Absolutely not. I have most people in the UK, work hard, and everything we earn is because we're working hard. We're not just giving it just because we're giving it for the hell of it. And reality is, by default and percentage-wise, I am paying more tax per person because I'm earning more. And also we're paying more tax because we have a higher earner. And as one of your callers said earlier, that actually, not everyone, this doesn't apply to everyone, but, fortunately I have private healthcare, so a lot of things I have when I have to go to the doctor, are covered by the health insurance. I have to go to a private dentist. And these things are fine, and I'm not moaning about that, but we are paying for those and not using the NHS so much as other people.
So if you add it all up, you feel you're paying your way?
I feel I'm paying our way, and I think, we're paying fair. I don't mind paying high tax, as we do on the kind of the higher mark, but I think it's high enough, and we shouldn't be paying any higher.
OK, Paul, thank you. Well, Andy disagrees with Paul strongly and says the reason the top 1% pay 28% of income tax is because they've not had austerity. They've taken huge pay rises by comparison to the majority, 99%. That's how Andy feels. But Gillian from Darlington says, I'm sick of paying huge amounts of tax. I'm moving to Switzerland. I mean it. Well, Gillian, you don't need to move because he hasn't put it up today, but maybe in the future. So maybe Gillian's leaving. She already thinks it's too high. I don't know. Let's go to High Wycombe and speak to Peter, a new caller. Peter, the end of austerity. It's good news, isn't it?
Yes, it is good news, and it was like the gentleman beforehand. I don't think I was that excited for the budget, but I was sort of happy with the status quo.
Yes.
The last 5 or 6 years, I've done very well, thank you very much. I'm not a millionaire, but I really don't want some socialist government spending my money until it's all gone and your money till it's all gone, because that's what they do. I've had experience with the Callaghan government and various other Labour governments, and that is the pattern that happens. So, fine.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would say, Peter, is this, that when David Cameron became Prime Minister, we had already bailed out the banks, all right? So that big expenditure had happened, and our national debt was running at 650 billion. We are now 8 years into a Conservative-led government, and the national debt is now 1.8 trillion. The annual cost of servicing that debt is about the same as the defence budget. It's not very responsible from the Tories, really, is it?
Yes, but don't forget, the first government was in conjunction with another party. It wasn't totally Conservative, so you've got to look at that. It was the second election, actually. He basically had full control. Then he pulled the plug when Brexit went the wrong way. He didn't even finish his term, which was, I thought, quite cowardly.
All I'm saying is, Peter, you talk about the Callaghan government, you talk about being irresponsible with money. I don't think the Tories, frankly, have done that well.
Well, they've done okay, and a lot of people are very wealthy. I work very hard. I've got 2 properties, but I don't want to tax on my second property. I don't want to give to causes that are totally against my ethos. So, I'm quite happy for the budget to do nothing.
So is the balance for higher earners and what they pay, do you think it's about right?
If you look at high earners, 1 to 2%, possibly their tax should go up to 60%, all right? But all they'll do is they'll go offshore. And many people, the millionaire socialists, the millionaire Tories, whatever, Mr. Green, he has an apartment in Monaco. That's what they will do. Mr. Hamilton, he has an apartment in Monaco. They will flee the country, which is fine. It's only 2% of the country, and if they want to pay 60%, then tax them even more. Not till they squeak, but to get your fair share out of them. Get the companies like Google and Facebook and all these companies to pay their proper tax, and not channel it through the Channel Islands or Ireland, and then ends up in the Cayman Islands. We know how to do it.
Yeah, no, it can be done. You're right. And currently it is being done on a huge scale. Peter, thank you very much indeed. I find the budget disgusting, not because there's nothing nice in it, but because it's a bribe to the country. It's saying, be good and do what you're told, and then you can have all this. Chris, one or two of you, I think, feeling that way. Why allow the idea to take hold that a March re-budget would automatically be worse? It wouldn't. We'd be 39 billion better off. Well, of course, that's the point about no deal, isn't it? No deal, we don't pay them 39 billion. It is actually quite tempting, but it's a slightly separate debate, although I think it was a very political budget that we saw today. Jim in Dartford. Jim, the end of austerity, we should all be happy.
Well, we should be, but I'm not sure that it's going to happen. I was going to make 2 points. One's already just been covered by the 39 billion plus.
Okay, fine, yep.
But we don't get anything for nothing. As an example, we've not had these the tax concessions, etc., for a few years. But what they've done instead is they've taken money away from the county councils. And therefore, and I've got an example of this where Kent County Council are carrying out a consultation about us having to pay for taking hardcore rubble and plasterboard to a tip. They want to charge us for it. Now, if that happens...
That's where austerity has been felt, isn't it? That's where austerity has been felt. That's where the real cutbacks have been. Money to county councils, local authorities, and certainly, the austerity narrative has some truth when it comes to that. But overall, Jim, we've lived through Labour screaming and shouting about austerity, but we've still been living way beyond our means.
I think we always will be. I think we're...
Well, I don't know. I remember in the 1980s, we were actually paying back the national debt at the end of the 1980s, so it can be done. It can be done. Jim, I thank you. I want to take one more opinion on this tonight before I run out of time. Going to go to Paul in Waltham Cross. Paul, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
So, are you impressed today? Is it good news? Is the sun shining?
No, it is not shining. The budget is a carrot and stick affair, as usual. The fact that our so-called leader, May, is going to be giving away our army in December is the reason that the increase in spending with the military is going to happen.
There is an increase.
Anyway.
There is an extra billion, but that's supposed to be particularly for cyber and anti-submarine warfare. And I know the point you're making about PESCO and EU cooperation, and we will debate more of that over the course of the next month or two. Anyway, is there anything in this budget, Paul, that impresses you?
Absolutely nothing. All it is, as I said, is a carrot and stick. If you play ball with us, we will make sure we look after you. What they're actually saying is we're digging the hole and you're going to be jumping in it.
Yeah. OK, Paul, thank you. Thank you to all of you. Well, I think, look, we've got to say that things are better than they might have been, despite all the dire predictions of what Brexit would do to the UK economy, not just after we'd left, but actually in this intervening period because of all the uncertainty. But there were a lot of political threats, I thought, out there today from a Chancellor who is, without doubt, a total Remainer. There we are. You've been listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm back tomorrow evening at 6 o'clock. At 10 tonight, it's Tom Swarbrick, but up next, it's Ian Dale.
Well, thank you very much, Nigel.